The San Joaquin Valley, home to rich oil reserves below the ground. Above them are fertile soils for growing food crops that feed the world. With a land so plentiful as this, can only lead to struggles and social conflicts. Delano, California, September 8, 1965. Filipino pickers walked out the fields to protest the unfair labor conditions they endured in the fields. On September 12, 1965, Latinos met at the Church of the Guadalupe to decide whether or not they were going to support the Filipinos. 2 weeks later, on September 16th, Filipinos would be joined by Mexican workers to endure this journey that would be the 5-year Delano Great Boycott. When the strike started, Filipino leader Larry Itliong met with Mexican leader Cesar Chavez. Itliong told Chavez to join him and the Filipino strike in an effort to get faster results. At the time, Chavez and his people were not ready to go on strike. In fact, they were not ready to protest for another 2 or 3 years. Before these two minority groups came together and united, they were often pinned against each other for decades by farmers. Larry Itliong's son talks to us about the conditions in the fields.
Well, basically, it was pretty deplorable. They didn't get bathroom breaks. There wasn't water. There was no shade. When it was over 100 degrees, they still had to work.
What started as a small protest and local strikes in farms along the San Joaquin Valley grew to a national concern. After the Latinos decided to join the Filipinos on the strike itself drew unexpected support and attention from outside the Central Valley, catching the attention of then-Senator Robert F. Kennedy, who ultimately came to discuss the problems that the workers were protesting for.
It's a question of education. It's a question of living conditions. It's a basic question of hope for the future.
Well, if I have reason to believe that there's going to be a riot started and somebody tells me that there's going to be trouble if you don't stop them, then it's my duty to stop them.
And then you go out and arrest them?
Well, absolutely.
And charge them?
Charge them.
What do you charge them with?
Violating unlawful assemblage.
Well, I think that's the most interesting. Who told you that they're going to riot?
The men right out in the field that they were talking to said, if you don't get them out of here, we're going to cut their hearts out. So rather than let them get cut, you remove the cause.
How can you go arrest somebody if they haven't violated the law?
They're ready to violate the law. In other words...
Could I suggest in the interim period of time, in the luncheon period of time, that the sheriff and the district attorney read the Constitution of the United States?
Caesar was effective at using the media to get the message out. The protesters' plan was that after a Senate hearing, they were going to tell the press that they were going to march. Their idea was that the press will be present to help tell their story. In the months of March and April of 1966, Chavez and strikers set out their 340-mile pilgrimage from Delano to the state capital, Sacramento, to draw national attention to their cause. By Easter Sunday, they reached the steps of the Capitol in Sacramento. After a couple of months of striking with few results, protesters almost lost hope.
The UFW was not really successful in getting the workers to walk off the job.
They relied on each other and donations from anyone who was willing to help the cause to continue going. They had started something they knew they must not quit. Eventually, they turned to boycotting all table and winery grapes. As these protests became perennial, protesters became desperate and turned to violence.
I was a freshman in the dorms and getting the call from my folks that our cold storage had been arsoned and burned down, which was the violence that was going on.
In terms of violence, that was not part of the policy of the union. The policy was nonviolence. Now, can you regulate everybody's behavior? Of course, the answer is no. You have to work very hard to convince people that it's harder through nonviolence, it's easy through violence, but I don't think Caesar was successful in convincing every single person in every single household not to respond to violence.
Becoming a national broadcast protest, tensions grew and local law enforcement intervened. Despite reports of Chavez's efforts to steer away from any harmful methods, accusations surfaced that he hired people to terrorize farmers and their families. When asked about the violence and who initiated the order, Johnny Itliong, son of Larry Itliong himself, said he believed Chavez was behind the violent protests.
Many farmers claim that supporters of Chavez used violence and vandalism. Do you agree?
100%. I was told by old union members that Chavez would hire the Teamsters and sent them to Coachella.
As a result, Kern County sheriffs arrested protesters at the picket line. However, their approach methods came under scrutiny because some of the arrests included brutal beatings and some resulting in death. In February 1968, Cesar Chavez announces his first fast in efforts to rededicate the movement to nonviolence. The fast lasted 25 days. In those 25 days, he lost 35 pounds. His doctors were in fear for his life, claiming it was in danger as a result of the fast. The fast ended during a mass in Delano that drew thousands of people, including Senator Robert F. Kennedy. He said, out of respect for one of the heroic figures of our time. The grape strikes and boycotts were ongoing. Again, the strikers continued to fight. Throughout all the struggles the workers experienced, losing their homes, cars, financial income, they continued to sacrifice to make their voices heard. They traveled across the US and Canada telling their stories and explaining their cause. By spring of 1970, the boycott was a success, ending after grape growers signed their first union contracts, guaranteeing workers better pay, benefits, and protection. On July 29, 1970, John Jamara and other Delano area grape growers gathered with UFW leaders and members at their union hall at 40 acres in Delano to sign the contract. Larry Itliong, the unionizer of the Filipinos, was also present at the signing. This contract, the 3-year agreement, ended the strikes, the protests, and the boycotts. The contract went into effect, workers resumed their jobs. Part of the deal was the introduction of labor hiring halls. Their purpose was pickers show up to the hiring halls and pick up their assigned farm.
That was a way to eliminate the labor contractor system. This was a new strategy, if you will, and there were some hard lessons learned.
By June of 1975, Jerry Brown becomes California's governor. As a response to the strikes and boycotts, growers agreed to a state law. It guarantees California farm workers the right to organize, vote in state-supervised secret ballot elections, and bargain with their employers. With Governor Jerry Brown's help, the UFW wins passage of the landmark Agricultural Labor Relations Act. After the Agricultural Labor Relations Act, the UFW continued to grow. They continued to stand for themselves, fighting for their rights as field workers. They no longer let themselves be overlooked at. They had a voice now, and they used it. Chavez continued his work. In time, he would end up doing his last and public and longest fast of 36 days. At the age of 61, doing this third fast was extremely dangerous for his health, but he himself believed it was necessary to call attention to farm workers and their children's exposure to pesticides. However, the government health department never found any dangerous health link between the pesticides and the workers. April 23, 1993, Cesar Chavez passes away. April 29, 1993. Some 40,000 mourners marched behind Chavez's plain pine casket during funeral services in Delano. He would later be laid to rest in La Paz in King, California. August 8, 1994. President Bill Clinton presents the Medal of Freedom, America's highest civilian honor, to Cesar Chavez. His widow, Helen, receives the medal during a White House ceremony. As a result of this movement, labor unions such as the UFW and legislation such as the Agricultural Labor Relations Act were created to ensure that all field workers were provided with basic necessities.